As a nature photographer, I feel at home in our parks and woodlands. When spring and summer pass by, I recognise the cries of common birds like the blackbird, magpie and crow. But sometimes, something catches me off guard. This is a ring-necked parakeet, and as you can probably see by looking at it, it isn't native to the UK. But it does live here now. And unlike our summer visitors like swallows and swifts, the parakeets don't fly off to warmer shores over winter. Groups of parakeets now live in UK parks the whole year round. The ring-necked parakeet is an example of a non-native species. These species originate from other countries, but can settle in other areas if conditions are right. In the case of the parakeet, genetics have told us that the UK populations stem from groups that lived in Pakistan and northern India. These most likely came over by boat in the late 19th century to supply the roaring exotic pet trade in Victorian England. Animals have been transported from country to country for as long as we've had boats, but as long as these visitors stay in captivity, they will have no impact on local animal populations. For a species to be called non-native, the captive animals must enter the wild, either by escaping or being released from captivity. And as with all good historical stories, there are several rumours surrounding how Britain's captive parakeets first entered the wild. Movie fans like to say that the first parakeets escaped from Worton Hall Studios in London, where filming for Katharine Hepburn's movie The African Queen was taking place in 1950. As a musician, I prefer the theory that Jimi Hendrix released a pair of parakeets on Carnaby Street in London in 1968. One thing that both of these theories have in common is that they both agree the first parakeets probably entered the wild in the mid-20th century. This also probably took place in London, which explains why London's parakeet population is still larger and more well known than others up and down the country. Once a captive species enters the wild, a pivotal moment takes place. Depending on the conditions in the place the species is released, it will either survive long enough to mate and start a new population, or it will die. This could be caused by an inhospitable climate, lack of suitable food, or the presence of a vicious predator. In the case of the parakeet, we can assume that none of these things happened, especially because Britain's parakeets are still doing well today. Estimates have shown that the parakeet population has been going up since the turn of the century, and there's nothing to suggest that it will decline anytime soon. As the parakeet population has been increasing, many nature lovers have been concerned about the impact of this on other British bird populations. The parakeet is classed as a non-native species, but if it were found to have a negative impact on other species, it would be called an invasive species. Invasive species fall under the umbrella of non-native species, but the term refers specifically to those that have a negative impact on their local environment. The most famous example of an invasive species in the UK is the grey squirrel. Grey squirrels arrived from North America in the late 19th century as pets, but quickly managed to escape into the wild. At this time, Britain already had its own native squirrel species, the red squirrel, and the two species now had to compete for food and territory. Although the red squirrel population was much larger initially, the small number of grey squirrels that had entered the wild were more aggressive and competitive than their red counterparts. Because of this, they quickly managed to outcompete the red squirrels for food and territory. Another advantage for the non-native grey squirrels was that they were carriers of the squirrel pox virus, a virus that was deadly for red squirrels but harmless to the greys that had carried it here from North America. As a result, the red squirrel population was decimated, whilst numbers of greys soared. These days, it is very unlikely that you will see a red squirrel outside of a special conservation site in England, although some natural populations do still remain in Scotland. The impact of the grey squirrels on the red squirrel population led to them being designated an invasive species, and their story has taught many conservation biologists to be cautious of non-native species. However, this doesn't mean that all species introduced from other countries are bad. The ring-necked parakeet is a herbivore and mostly eats berries, nuts and seeds. Since its arrival in the UK, the parakeet has been known to eat scraps of meat from bins or dropped food, but this doesn't make up a part of its natural diet. Although the parakeets are eye-catching, if you do live near a park where they have been sighted, you will probably find that they're pretty hard to see. This is because parakeet populations are small compared to other much-loved British birds. The most recent estimates, made in 2016 by the British Trust for Ornithology, found that there are 12,000 pairs of parakeets living in Britain. This is a lot considering the populations started with a few escaped pets, but it still pales in comparison to our 1.6 million pairs of goldfinch, 5 million pairs of wood pigeon, and 7.4 million pairs of robins. Knowing what we do about the parakeet's population size and diet, it's difficult to panic about parakeets ruffling any feathers in our parks in the near future. That being said, if parakeet populations continue to rise along with global temperatures, it is possible that this could be a very different story by the end of the century.